Howdy, leadership scholars, and welcome back to ALEC 617. So we are jumping straight into, honestly, a whole lot of content. I'm sorry, this is not how you want to spend like day two of this class, but we're going to cover some basic conceptual frameworks of organizational culture, really drawing from, I would say, the OG, if you want to say the original gangsta of organizational culture, Edgar Schein. Schein is the guy. I met him at a conference and I totally fangirled out on him. It was so embarrassing. But he is the guy who started org culture as a academic discipline and a study. He's got some great books on it. So we're going to talk about organizational culture in general. We're going to talk about the specific levels of culture that are out there that when you are analyzing an organization or developing an organization that are really important to keep in mind. And we're going to end today's lecture with rites and rituals. So why is this lecture important? I love to start with the WIFM. The what's in it for you? Well, what's in it for you is, man, this is going to be essential for your case study. So make sure you take good notes. Make sure you refer back to this as you are working on that case study. So let's get started. Let's talk about what is culture. So I'll give you a second just to kind of pause and ponder. What is culture to you? When you hear that word, what do you think about? So when we think about this through some different lenses of culture, your mind may have gone to the more layman, which indicates sophistication, right? A socioeconomic class status, very fancy. So that idea of someone being very cultured. Are you worldly? Do you understand higher level things, right? Can you appreciate art, right? That's always cultured. Do you know all the jazz artists? That makes you a little bit more cultured. So that's more of a descriptor, I think, when it comes to actually describing culture. That's describing someone and how they act, how they see the world, even what social circles do they run into. Now, another way to look at this is the anthropological way. So you've got anthropologists that just study culture. Archaeologists study the remnants of culture. Not gonna lie, I wanted to be Indiana Jones when I grew up as a kid. But they actually look at the customs and rituals that all societies, whether it's big society or a smaller tribal society, sometimes when you think about anthropologists, you think about people that go native, but they develop over the course of their history because culture absolutely changes. Sometimes it's a seismic shift. Sometimes it's that old frog boiling in the water, right? That it just happens so slowly and you're like, wait, what just happened? So looking at this, it's very much, I would say, an ethnographic approach to looking at culture. Culture can also be, like I said, broadly defined or smallly defined. So culture could be anything. And I think about all the different cultures that make us up, right? That I am made up of. I'm originally from a small town in Texas, so I'm a small town girl, right? I've got an agrarian background, so I'm an ag person. I'm an oldest child, so I've got all the trauma of being an oldest child. But when you think about all the different cultures, I'm a mom, I'm a professor, I'm a wife, all those different cultures that make me who I am, anthropologically speaking, that is a study of ethnography. And so looking at it from that lens is kind of I think, a neat way to do it. One of my favorite examples of an ethnographic anthropological look at culture, I read in grad school for my qual class, and it was about a professor in the 90s that she realized that she was not speaking the same language as her students. So at this point, she's towards the end of her career. She's early 60s, and she had used a reference about a song in class. And so she said, okay, finish this line. And she threw out a line for a song, and her students just looked at her blankly. They didn't even know what song she was trying to refer to. Y'all, that has happened to me so many times. I know, which means I'm getting old. But I remember talking about chunking things, just taking a big project and breaking it into smaller parts. And I put a picture of Chunk from the Goonies, and like a quarter of the class laughed. And I was like, what? It's Chunk. And they're like, we don't know who that is. I was like, oh, I've just become that teacher. Okay, anyways, I digress. So she said, and she was a psychology professor. So she said, you know what? I can't reach my students, and I'm worried about not being able to do my research well if I don't really even know what's going on in my students' lives. So like I said, she's early 60s. Her kids are grown. So she made the decision to go back to school. So again, here's a dated reference, Rodney Dangerfield. So she goes back to school. She goes to a different university, enrolls as a freshman, lives in the dorm, takes freshman level classes. She joins student organizations. And, the freshmen are like, this is a hoot. Who's this old lady like living down the hall? This is nuts. And so she really immersed herself in that culture of what it was like to be an undergraduate student. And the book is really cool. It's about her experiences and lessons learned and how it really changed her as a professor. I just think that's a really fun example. Now, from our kind of point of view, researchers, managers, leaders for this class as well, as we talk about that idea of climate and practices that organizations specifically develop around their people, the espoused values, the credo of the organization. So basically the vision and mission of what we do and how we do it even. And that becomes the dictator of predictive and engaging behavior. So culture and how that is developed, how it is implemented, how it is rewarded, how it is celebrated, how it is punished, how it is perpetuated, right? That is hugely impactful to the day-to-day operations of the people, their mindsets, how this is, it's just really how people get their life. Like, how do we make sense of things? And it's through that lens of culture. Now you can probably start seeing how ethics is part of that as well, right? Because how we handle people, what are our values, all of those have ethical undertones. So when we think about what does that culture look like, and it helps us to understand our world a little bit better, which makes a lot of sense, it has to do with ethics. So let's get into the actual Schein definition. So again, this is Edgar Schein. And so what he found, which is really kind of just a quick aside on him, started out as a consultant, worked for what are they called? They're not hatchet people. It's not a hedge fund. Dad rat it. I need some more coffee. It's when you like buy an organization and you go in and you either like fire a bunch of people or you decide if you're going to sell it off for parts, whatever that's called. Somebody shoot me an email, help me out. That's what he did. So he went into organizations to either fix them or dismantle them. And so he started trying to figure out what makes an organization successful. And he found that it was the culture. The culture actually dictates success because it is almost synonymous with this idea of success and length of history and, will you make it? Will you not? Are you reaching your goals? So what Schein said is it is a pattern of shared basic assumptions. Assumptions is key, right? Because you know what you do and you assume that was learned by a group. So it's a learned pattern behavior as it solved its problems. Sometimes that's an external adaptation or an internal integration that's worked enough to be considered valid, and then we perpetuate it. We teach it to new members, and we teach them that this is our way. This is the insert organization way. And because of that, that continues that culture, perpetuates it, and keeps that machine moving forward, which is really interesting. So looking and thinking about, why do we need this? Why should we as leaders understand this concept? It's really because, and I know this is going to seem silly as an analogy, but leadership and organizational culture is almost like peanut butter and jelly. They can exist on their own, but when you put them together, there's just this special magic that makes it more effective. Right? Okay, don't come at me if you're not a peanut butter and jelly fan. So looking at, there's really kind of four big things that culture does for the organization that makes it more effective. The first thing is it gives it structural stability. I think COVID probably taught us all that structural stability is so unbelievably important, because it is that group identity. The organizational culture gives us meaning. It gives us a sense of predictability. Like, I know these are my people. This is where I belong. This is what I do. It is that stability piece that's very, very important. Shared, stable, because it defines who we are. Depth. So the depth is sometimes almost unconscious part. So when we talk about group norms, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, it's absolutely what we do. It's maybe less tangible and visible to the outside, but it's the day-to-day operations, that manifestation of culture, who we are, and that dictates a lot for the organization. You know, our department, Ag Leadership Education and Communications, forever, I would say since the beginning of our department till probably early 2010s, we were 100% committed to teaching. We were here for our students. We are student-centered. That is what we do. Then we had a outside force come in to change the culture. It rocked the stability, not gonna lie. And it started slowly changing our culture to one that needs to be more, I want to say research focused, but it needs to have more of a research presence, right? There are some that are completely research focused, but you need to go after grants. You need to go after, you need to be publishing. You need to be publishing in specific journals. And so it has moved a little bit of what our identity was in that depth into something different. So it's actually kind of shaping and changing. And it's been a hot minute since that process has started, but it's really taking a little bit of time, because when culture is so ingrained, when that depth is so deep, it's hard to change it, which, we're going to spend a whole lesson talking about change. But it also, organizational culture gives breadth to the organization. So it covers all the functions, all aspects of how the organization deals with tasks, environments, internal operations. This is our standard operating procedure, right? And culture actually dictates that. So it covers everything and everyone. I think about, travel. If you're going to, for an organization, some organizations there's a person that does all the travel. And so you go to that person and they do all the travel, and that's the breadth. That's what they do. Everyone knows that procedure. And there are other organizations where you have to do it yourself, and you have to use like Concur or one of those other operating systems. But everyone knows, like, okay, that's just what we do. So it's that breadth. And then patterning and integration, and I think this is interesting too. It ties everything together into this coherent whole. It makes, I guess, sense of daily occurrences. I think about really good sports teams. When we get a new coach, and here at Texas A&M, it seems like that's happening more and more. We don't have a whole lot of coaches that are institutions. We've got a couple. But it's that idea of when a new coach comes in, they kind of develop their own culture with that team. Back when Coach Evans was the softball coach, I had a lot of players, and a couple of the managers were in my team, or in my team's class. I taught us on the undergraduate level, and they talked about, when we talked about culture, that there were the depth, that idea of unconscious parts. This is just what we do. This is who we are. And it was, they always hit first, then they fielded, and then they lifted, and then they ran. And that was their, I guess, standard operating procedure, right? That's their breadth as well. And the why was given from upperclassmen to lowerclassmen. So it was that idea of, we're going to tell you this is what we do, this is why we do it, and this is how we do it. They had certain songs that they would play on the bus on the way to the field and things like that. And that was just part of the culture. And you taught the new people that culture. So it became a pattern. What we do all the time, this is who we are, this is how you can join us, if that makes sense. Now, there's lots of ways to describe culture. So if you're going to do like an organizational analysis, if you are developing an idea of what an organization should look like for you as a leader, these are some things that you can use to either analyze or help describe or help create when it comes to organization. So basically just like subsections of organizational culture. So the first one is observed behavioral regularities when people interact. This is always fun, right? It's the language they use. It's the customs, the traditions that involve, the rituals they employ in a wide variety of situations. So rites, rituals, we will talk about that at the end of this lecture. When I was at Oklahoma State for my PhD, Dr. Edwards was one of the professors, and he called everyone Mr., Mrs., or Doctor. So even when he was talking to his colleagues, he never called anyone by their first name. It was always, Dr. Weeks or Dr. Kelsey, or if it was a graduate student, Mrs. Rucker or whatever it was. And so it was funny because we would refer to each other when Edwards wasn't around as our first names. But then if Dr. Edwards is around, he changed the culture to where everyone started kind of picking that up because he was one of the opinion leaders. I will remember after I passed my dissertation defense when he called me by doctor the first time. Oh boy, that felt good. Even to this day when he sees me at conferences and he's like, "Hey, Dr. Strong." I'm like, "Oh, I've moved from Mrs. to doctor," right? It was very, very fun. So these are easy things to observe about how people interact with each other. Group norms. So this is the implicit standards and values that kind of evolve in working groups. So it could be so many different things. That's what I'm saying. It could be the unwritten rules as well. It's just what we do. And so it's again, pretty easy to observe that this is the norm. I think back to my first big kid job at the University of Georgia. I walked in, first day, power suit, right? Man, I was proud of that suit. Just out of grad school, just bought this suit. I'm going to walk in and I'm going to rock it. It was like January 4th. I'm going to wear this suit. I'm going to prove that I need to be here. And when I got there, which we'll get to when I talk about rites of passage, they have a bit of a hazing that they did at the University of Georgia at the time where you didn't have any equipment the first 3 days that you were there. So they wouldn't order your computer. They didn't have your phone in. And usually they didn't even have furniture in your office. And so you just were there. I didn't know any of that, right? But at the time, when I walk in the power suit and I walk in at 8 a.m., no one is in the building. Then about 9 o'clock, people started showing up. And I was like, oh, so we don't start the day at 8 o'clock? And I made friends very quickly with the provost's secretary who was in our building. Her name was Beth. And I said, "Beth, like, people don't come till 9? She's like, "Not when classes aren't in session, girl. You're crazy." And I was like, I didn't know, right? But it was this norm that I didn't know. It was part of their culture. And no one dressed up. even during the school year. Like the guy who dressed up the most was the provost in charge of that campus, and he wore like a pair of khakis and a polo shirt. I was severely overdressed. So that was just, the norms that I didn't know. Espoused values. What is it that we tell people we are all about? So these are articulated, publicly announced principles and values that the group claims to be trying to achieve. So Walmart, right? Walmart is low prices. That is their espoused value. That's who they are. That's what they're known for. Texas A&M, we have some espoused values too, right? We've got Relish. We talk about it. We have a campus named after it. It's on the doors to the MSC. So there are organizations that are values-based organizations, and they are very clear that this is their meaning, this is the reason why they're here, this is their mission. So that can be used to actually describe and perpetuate the culture as well. Now, a formal philosophy, broad policies and ideological principles that guide groups' actions towards basically buy-in by stakeholders. So that could be employees, that could be customers, that could be outside stakeholders. HP used to be known as the HP way. Hewlett Packard, do they even exist anymore, y'all? I don't know if they do, right? So maybe it wasn't a good formal philosophy. But these are usually written down, shared in not only like a new employee handbook type situation, but these are the things that we know we do. The rules of the game. They are implicit, unwritten rules for getting along in the organization. So knowing the ropes. So what are the unwritten things that you need to know? So I didn't know the rules of the game at the University of Georgia, that you don't wear a business suit, even if you're teaching, that you don't come to work at 8 o'clock if school isn't in session, right? I didn't know those rules, but so many times those rules absolutely make a huge impact. It could be, do you actually follow chain of command if there's a problem, or do you jump chain? Right? That's part of organizational culture. Who do you go to when? If you have a problem with this, what's your next step? Who's really in charge? Some people have the title, but some people actually have the power. Those are the rules of the game. So you can use that to look at organizational culture as well. Climate. So we know, right, about climate. There's a lot of organizations that have trouble with climate. It's one of those innate things. You want to go back to your gut. When you walk in and it just doesn't feel right, like something is off. I don't know if your hackles are raised or what it is. And it could be anything from layout, like physical layout of the organization, how and when people interact with each other, with customers, with other people. For us in our department, growing up in Alec as an undergrad, we lived in Scoats Hall. So if you haven't been to Scoats Hall on main campus, it's a beautiful architecture building full of, mold and asbestos and wonderful history. But it's laid out very differently than if you have ever come to our AGLS building. When we moved to AGLS in 2011-ish, maybe 2012, it was a huge thing. It changed our culture because we went from being very communal to having 2 long hallways and everyone had offices with doors. In Scoats, we had big offices where like 6 people shared an office, and it was this great open office space. And so it really changed, right? You can tell when you walk into someone's office what the climate is, how their desk is arranged. That can tell you a lot. Do they have one of those big mahogany desks with the giant leather chairs and you have to sit in a smaller chair in front of them, right? Is that a power move? All of those things are part of organizational climate. All right, embedded skills. What in the heck are those? Those are special competencies displayed by group members in accomplishing certain tasks. This usually gets passed on from person to person without being really articulated necessarily in writing. So if someone has the skill to insert whatever that skill is, like Clarice, if you guys have dealt with Clarice, she is our graduate coordinator. She was amazing at, well, just about everything, but she knew how to do so many things because she'd been around like that historical knowledge, right? She'd been, and people had taught her how to do specific things, and who do you order from for a meal, and if you have this kind of dietary issue, what do you do with that? It's very cool. But it could be even like IT, other people like academic advisors now, that information is passed, and it is definitely a skill. Mental models are really interesting, I think. There's so many things that we see through our own lens, and that is a mental model. So that shared cognitive frame that guides your perceptions and thoughts and language. This has an ethical slant 100% because we treat our mental model as big T truth, not necessarily little t truth. And so we see the world through our own lens, and sometimes we become what we call ethnocentric in ethical terms of not only do we see our organization through our own lens, but we think our organization is perfect and everyone else is wrong, I guess. Being from, and I apologize in advance because mental models are very, they can be very hurtful. So this may be hurtful for you. So here's my disclaimer. But growing up in North Texas that I did, we had some very serious mental models about institutions like universities. My dad graduated from Tarleton, and he had some very specific views on even Texas A&M, right? He had a bumper sticker on the back of his truck that said Tarleton State University, the best part of the Texas A&M university system, right? That's what I grew up with. Now, in his defense, he actually was the Texan. He was the mascot for a while. But he would tell me all the time, Jen, you better keep your grades up or you're going to have to get your guns up. So what he was telling me was if I don't keep my grades up, I'm going to end up going to Texas Tech. Because my dad and a lot of that group in North Texas saw Texas Tech as an inferior school to Texas A&M, UT, some of the other institutions around, Baylor, TCU. And so that was a mental model that I grew up with of thinking that Tech is inferior, which is crazy because there for a while I was on faculty at Tech because we had that joint EDD program. And in Texas Tech's a good school, for specific things. Like they do things really, really well. Just like we do things really well. And UT does things really, really well. So it's just kind of funny. But mental models can get really kind of unethical pretty fast. So you always have to keep those in check. Shared meaning. So emergent understanding creating by group members as they interact. So the more we interact, that observed behavior that you see, then you start building. Those are those inside jokes, the shared mental models that you have. Root metaphors. It's also called integrating symbols. So this is the way that the group evolved to characterize themselves. So sometimes it's conscious. So it could be actually buildings, office layouts. Sometimes it's more of an emotional response to things. What are you known for? So what are those root metaphors? I think that we, again, going back to office furniture, I don't know why I'm so fixated on that. In Alec, we get most of our office furniture from surplus. I don't know if it's because we don't want to spend money on office furniture or if we know there's some good stuff there. If you just do some bargain hunting, maybe we're all fans of Ross. I don't know. But that seems to be where we get a lot of our furniture is from surplus, Texas A&M surplus. And that's just kind of the running joke of who we are, and we're the behavioral scientists in the College of Ag, the kind of forgotten leftovers, and that's what we get. But we kind of own it, right? Like, yeah, we're going to own this. This is going to be what we are and who we do. And then there are formal rituals and celebrations. We will absolutely speak about that here in a little bit. But that's the ways that the group celebrates key events, those rites of passage. So it could be promotions, it could be projects or milestones. There is a professor over in the College of Education, and whenever one of her PhD students defends their dissertation successfully, she takes a bell and she walks around the hallway ringing that bell to let everyone know that her student passed. I think that that's kind of a really cool ritual and celebration. If you've watched any of the Say Yes to the Dresses, right, that is a formal ritual and celebration. If you find the wedding dress of your dreams, then you say yes to the dress. And if sometimes you do ring a bell there too. And so it's just things like that. I think those are kind of fun. Now, switching and kind of talking about levels of culture. To me, this is a really cool way to dissect an organization, but get a more holistic view. So when we think about levels of culture, I think about a Egyptian pyramid, right? So when the explorers, usually the English that stole everything and pillaged it back to England, when they found the Egyptian pyramids, they didn't find like the whole Great Pyramid of Giza, right? They found the tippy top part, and then they excavated out, right? They had to dig, and they kept getting deeper and deeper and more integrate into what's actually going on within this pyramid, because at first they were like, we don't know what this is. It's just kind of a triangle in the middle of the desert. But then they found more and more and more, and that's what levels of culture do. So we have a pyramid where the top level is easy to see. We have the stuff in the middle, and that's basically the things that we want others to see. And then we have the stuff at the bottom of the pyramid where the good stuff is located, right? And that is actually the stuff that really makes the organization go, but a lot of people don't know about it. So what do I mean by this? That top level, that surface level, those are called artifacts. So these are the phenomenon that we use our five senses to pick up on. So we see, we hear, we feel, sometimes we smell, right? When we encounter a new group or an unfamiliar culture, or even if we're just taking a look with new eyes at our own culture. So it could be, and I'd love to use Texas A&M throughout this because I think that's a shared experience and culture that we can talk about. We have lots of artifacts at Texas A&M, right? We have colors. We are maroon and white. And so that is something that somebody can see and be like, yep, that's who they are. We have a mascot. We have Rev. And so you don't exactly know the backstory necessarily of Reveille. You just know that a collie dog is our mascot because she's on TV all the time. Sometimes, and they're easy to observe, but difficult to decipher, right? So again, you don't know, if you're a casual Aggie observer, you don't know why we have Reveille. You don't know why her name is Reveille, right? What does that mean? You may see on TV thousands of people standing and swaying back and forth and singing about sawing somebody's arms off. I've had so many friends go, why do you sing about sawing somebody's arms off? I'm like, it's horns. Horns, not arms. But people don't get it, right? Again, A&M is a perfect example of this because we have that saying, from the outside looking in, you can't understand it. And from the inside looking out, it's hard to explain it. We are absolutely ripe with artifacts of who we are and what we do. And so that is the things that you can easily see. In your case study, you're going to be asked to take this organization and what are the artifacts? So what are the things that you can see? Not only that you can see on the case study, but that you already know about the organization. There are organizations that have symbols. Like if you see a giant yellow M driving down the road, that's a McDonald's. Now, when you get to McDonald's, you don't know if you're driving down the interstate. You don't know if it's a McDonald's inside of a gas station right? You don't know if it's a McDonald's with a playland. You don't know if it's a McDonald's that is completely digital. You don't know any of that till you actually get there, but because it could be lots of different things. But when you see the golden arches, you know you've got McDonald's. So artifacts or things like that. Now, and then you move into espoused beliefs, which is kind of neat. So what are the things that the organizations say that they are? So it's their beliefs, their values, their sense of what ought to be, what makes them distinct, right? For us, we have RELAs. We have those core values. We understand and we are socially validated by following RELAs. So if you do, let's say you commit like the horrible crime of academic dishonesty and you go to the honors council and you go through cheater rehab, boy, they tell you, this is how your actions are not part of RELAs. I don't want to say it's almost shaming, but those espoused beliefs and values keep us in line because we want to stay true to our values. So I also think of, values-based organizations. Those organizations that are not publicly traded can usually be a little bit more open about their values. Chick-fil-A, love them or hate them, are definitely a values-based organization. So you can see that they are not closed. Like an artifact is they are not open on Sunday. That they say my pleasure. And that comes from Truett Cathy's personal values and what he has instilled in that organization. And you may not know this. The reason why they're closed on Sunday was Truett was a junior high Sunday school teacher at his local church, and they were talking about the importance of rest and how resting on Sunday and the Sabbath is really important for your spiritual and emotional life and physical life. And so one of his junior high kids said, "Man, Mr. Cathy, you're telling us this is important, but as soon as Sunday school's over, you're leaving and you're going back to your restaurant. So what you're telling us is we should rest, but you're not resting." And he said that was his aha moment where he went, okay, if I'm espousing this, if I'm saying these things, then I have to have my actions back my words. So when we think about modeling the way, we think about from a leadership perspective, making sure that your values match your actions, match your words, that idea of authentic leadership, that comes from what are we telling people we believe in? And how can they then see that manifested? So these shared values become embodied because it becomes that ideological or organizational philosophy and a guide to deal with unexpected events. So when you have your espoused values and something happens on a large scale, I know I keep going back to COVID, but I think that's something that we can all identify with, that policies based on something that came out of seemingly nowhere and shut down the world, that dictated how we moved on, were these espoused beliefs and values. So again, a little bit deeper on that pyramid, understanding that we're getting a little deeper in organizational ideas. And then the last one are the basic underlying assumptions. So once that was a hypothesis or an espoused value that happened just because, it comes to be treated as gospel, as reality, as this is what we do. Texas A&M, we have a lot of basic underlying assumptions, like if Reveille is in your class and she barks, we're supposed to let class out, right? That's not written anywhere. It's a tradition, but it's a tradition that we adhered to. It's that unconscious assumptions. Sometimes they distort data. So it's my values become our values, and this is what we do, and this is just because this is what we've always done. And how it can change, right? So working from home, it was seen pre-COVID as sure you're working from home, right? You're just laying around watching soap operas, or reality TV. I don't even think they have any soap operas on anymore. But you weren't doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? You're home doing laundry. You're not actually working. Well, now after COVID, people don't assume that. If you are working from home, they're assuming, yeah, you're getting some work done because we all had to do that. So we all have that shared experience now. So it's interesting that assumptions can change, but they're shared and they're mutually reinforced. So Texas A&M, we have our core values. We introduce them and enforce them through fish camp and tea camp and graduate camp. And even when new faculty come in, we have new faculty orientation and we teach them about our values. And this is how we live our values. And this is what we do with our values. And so many times when A&M has made decisions, they will, the good leaders, the good presidents will go back and talk about how that links to the value. So when I always call him Dr. Welch, when President Welch had the big commission looking at what should we do about the UT A&M game coming back, he, in his decision to not bring back student-led bonfire on campus, he cited our core values as one part of the reasoning of why he didn't do that. So it was taking the espoused values and then using those to explain the assumptions that we all had. And he brought forth some of the assumptions and aired those out. So it's really interesting. They are passed from person to person. They are usually not written down, but they are the code. It is what we do. So when you're doing your organizational analysis for your case study, this is going to be the hardest one to really try to dig down and figure out, are they doing what they espouse and how are they doing it and how is that passed? If that helps, that makes sense. Now, these are things that are, I want to say one more thing, rooted down deep and they're hard to root out. So once you have these assumptions, it's really hard to change them. Now, relatively quickly, talk about rituals and rites of passage. Again, another great way to look at an organization, to understand an organization. And we saw as a society how detrimental it is when rituals and rite of passages are canceled. So again, with the COVID, I'm sorry. But when we've had, graduations were canceled and proms were canceled and weddings couldn't happen. And that really changed a lot of people's lives. And, now that we've got some of our students that didn't get to have a graduation ceremony in high school, but did in college, like how important that was to them because they then got to have that in college. So let's talk a little bit, what is technically a ritual? So a ritual is a form of social action in which a group's values and identity are publicly demonstrated and enacted in a stylized manner with the context of a specific occasion or an event. So like a graduation, like a wedding, right? A rite of passage is a ritual within a ceremonial context. So rituals can, all rites of passage are rituals, but not all rituals are rites of passage. SAT question for you there. Isn't that what that sounded like? Does that make sense? So you can have a ritual that doesn't include ceremony, but a rite of passage actually is not only ceremonial, but it's actually leveled. So there are different phases of a rite of passage. So preliminary phase, you are removed from your previous role at this, and you are, I would say, trying to figure out exactly that kind of next step. You're a little bit off your game. You're starting something new. You're exploring something new. I'm going to talk about this in terms of being a faculty member on the tenure track. So this phase would be you're removed from being a graduate student. You graduate with your PhD, your EDD, and then you move into a faculty role. So that preliminary phase is that transition. So you're removed from your old thing, you're going into something new, and you're not quite sure what that is. Here's another example too. If you're in a fraternal organization, fraternity, sorority, there's lots of other organizations, a Mason, things like that, this preliminary phase would be your rush. So you're trying to decide what organization you want to join. So you're moving from being just a student without an organization into trying to figure out what that next organization is going to look like. So that could be too, as a graduate student, trying to figure out what university you're going to go to. Then the transition phase, it resides between roles. So where you don't actually have a social identity. So a pledge in a sorority or fraternity, or an assistant professor. You're like, wow, thanks, Dr. Jen. I will tell you for sure, because you really don't have any identity because you can't. Tenure is, it's a hot mess, but there are certain things you can and cannot do, in certain ways you can and cannot be yourself because you're in this transitional phase. You haven't been accepted into the group. So you have to make sure that you don't make the wrong person angry, right? You have to be very political with how you say things and what you do and, what you teach and how you teach and what you research and how you research. And so it's this really, again, this transitional phase. Then, yay, if you get, did I say you're a pledge? I think it's a pledge phase when you're in a fraternity sorority. Now, the post-liminal phase is when you've actually been accepted into the group and you have been incorporated into that new role. As an associate professor, you have arrived, you have tenure, you have to work really hard to get fired, do nothing or do something terrible in order to get kicked out of the group. But you're in this new phase. So once you become a member of the organization that you're trying to do, if that makes sense. So there's rites of passage actually have phases. Now, types of rites, and you can get into these a little bit more. I'm just kind of doing surface level of these, but looking at the rites of passage could be hazing. A little bit of hazing is a good thing. A lot of bit of hazing is a bad thing. Getting people into that, moving them from preliminary to transitional to post-liminal, right? That is a rite. External or rites of degradation are external threats moving past that together that make the organization stronger. So there could be some either real or not real external threats that the rite of degradation actually helps you form and bond together to fight that external. So having a rivalry in college, right? That is a rite of degradation. So you work together to beat that rival. Rites of enhancement. So these are the most visible ceremonial acts. So this is when the rite is a ritual as well. So this could be, most of the time it's some kind of a reward. So you make that reward very public. Our college is really great about having an award ceremony where they give like outstanding researcher, an outstanding teacher, an outstanding service, an outstanding extension. And so they do that as a big ceremony. So that's when you kind of think about that. Graduation would be a rite of enhancement as well. Engaging the spirit is rite of renewal. So these are the things that encourage the heart that are a rite within the organization. In higher education, that would be a sabbatical or faculty development leave, giving you that time to renew yourself and come back a better, stronger person. Rite of conflict resolution is how do we deal with conflict? This actually is a rite or procedure. There are some organizations that you have to go through a specific HR representative who is a mediator, or if you are in mediation, you can only talk if you have the talking stick, whatever that is. But that is actually a rite of conflict resolution. And then the rites of integration is, how do we get people into the culture? So for Texas A&M, again, that's like a fish camp situation or a hullabaloo class, or things that we do in order to get people within the organization. It could be a new employee orientation or a new employee handbook, or a mentoring program, right? A mentor is, I would say, one of the most impactful ways that you can be integrated into organizational culture quicker and more effectively, if that makes sense. I know this is a long lecture. I'm sorry, y'all. We had a lot to cover, but this is really good fundamental stuff that will help you moving forward in this class and in your everyday life, of just taking a look at your organization and saying, what's actually going on here? What are the artifacts? What are the espoused values? What are the assumptions? It'll help when you're on the job market as well. As, do you really want to work in this organizational culture? Or is there another place that you feel like you kind of fit better? So really good practical skills, really helpful moving forward. And I'll talk to you next time.